At what point is there a tipping point? 17 days after the shooting death of Renée Good, masked immigrations and customs enforcement agents in Minneapolis, again shooting dead a U.S. citizen, this time 37-year-old Alex Pretti. Again, there's video evidence to contradict official narratives that the victims were acting as domestic terrorists. There's the race to gather evidence before it can be tainted or destroyed, media echo chambers, and a U.S. president who watches from on high. Why these shows of force? Will they discourage dissent or trigger a backlash? Do these hurriedly recruited federal agents armed with military-grade weapons answer to courts and lawmakers or solely to the U.S. president? And while passions reach boiling point in specific opposition strongholds, will the rest of the United States continue to go about its business? At what point is the rest of the population affected by this breaking of norms and pushing of boundaries? More broadly, has the veneer come off a superpower that claimed a certain exceptionalism in its values, values on which it arguably won the Cold War? What's changed, and is that change for good? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if ICE is above the law. With us from Minneapolis, criminal defense attorney James Cook. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
From New York, Bernard Harcourt, professor of law and political theory at Columbia University. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
She co-published a video op-ed, We Study Fascism and We're Leaving the U.S. last March. Marcy Shore, chair in European Intellectual History at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to Malcolm Biga, U.S. politics editor at French news magazine Le Nouvel Économiste.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. On the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, the anger palpable. And while the U.S. president announced he was dispatching his border czar, a judge was considering a request to temporarily stop the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in Minnesota. We've seen people once again this Monday flocking to a makeshift memorial for that second victim of ICE agents in less than 3 weeks. Charlotte Hughes has more.
A vigil at the site where protester Alex Pretti was shot dead by a federal immigration agent on Saturday. Among those present at the site were members of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The Bureau said on Saturday that federal agents had blocked its attempts to begin an investigation. There is a legal fight now underway over control of that. With Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE agents still in place, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz addressed his words to the U.S. president.
So my question is, what's the plan, Donald Trump? What is the plan? What do we need to do to get these federal agents out of our state? You thought fear, violence, and chaos is what you wanted from us? And you clearly underestimated the people of this state and nation.
In a post on social media, Donald Trump blamed what he called democratic chaos for the incident. Pretti's family say they want the truth. This, as analysis of videos of the killing of the 37-year-old intensive care nurse, contradicts statements from the Trump administration that it was carried out defensively. Former US President Barack Obama on X said,
"The killing of Alex Pretti is a heartbreaking tragedy. It should also be a wake-up call to every American, regardless of party, that many of our core values as a nation are increasingly under assault."
Similarly, Bill Clinton has urged Americans to stand up and speak out. A US Senator in Louisiana for the Republicans, Bill Cassidy, says the credibility of ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are at stake, and calls for a joint federal and state investigation. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino says he will be awaiting the results of the investigation.
I wasn't there wrestling that assaultive subject that was assaulting Border Patrol agents. I wasn't there wrestling him myself, so I'm not going to speculate. I'm going to wait for that investigation to come. No, don't interrupt me. I'm going to wait till that investigation comes out until I make a decision there.
Democrats in Congress, meanwhile, are saying they will hold up Homeland Security funding. This amid a death that has provoked outrage.
James Cook, before I ask you about the mood today, tell us about your weekend. I understand you were in court.
Yes, I was in court actually on Friday, doing criminal defense portion for the influencer known as the woke farmer, and he was released from court. And it was fine. You know, the government made their arguments that he should be detained further. The judge didn't buy it, so ultimately he was released that afternoon. Went home, things are kind of normal. Wake up the next morning at about 6 a.m. and ICE is attempting to raid his house. And this is after he was released by a federal judge. So went to the location where he was staying, saw the aftermath of their attempts to execute the warrant. They actually executed the warrant on the wrong house. They entered a neighbor's house who has a pacemaker. They startled him, and then I kind of dealt with that. And then approximately about an hour and a half later, they shot Mr. Pretti. And then you saw what happened. I mean, you've covered extensively the public reaction to that.
And this Monday, we saw people early come to this sort of makeshift memorial. Minneapolis has been through a lot since the start of 2026. What's the mood today?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. It's exactly what Obama said. It's a tragedy, and it didn't have to happen. And we are bracing for more. Based on what I've seen with my own eyes, and I'm not even talking about from a legal standpoint, ICE has pretty much operated recklessly, and it's sort of escalated every single situation, and that's why people are dying, and that's kind of the mood. While it's somber, and they're trying to memorialize Mr. Pretti's life, but at the same time, they're bracing for more.
Yeah, we're showing live images there. There was while you're speaking, we know that the border patrols are expected. That's the Attorney General of Minnesota, who we just saw a moment ago. Before we talk about the legal aspect of it, Marcy Shore, how do you make sense of this in light of what you just heard there from James Cook? These federal agents, in his personal instance, going to the wrong house, or issuing warrants despite what the courts had said?
Well, first, I want to thank James Cook for being here and for being in Minneapolis. I've been watching Minneapolis, the streaming all weekend, with kind of awe and admiration for so many of my fellow Americans who are actually there on the front line, and with a lot of guilt for not being there myself. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an intellectual historian. I teach Kant. I deal a lot with the realm of the metaphysical, but this is not subtle. We are way outside the realm of the rule of law. We have been way outside the realm of the rule of law for a long time. We all watched at point blank range, those ICE agents murder Renée Good and then murder Alex Pretti. And there was excellent video analysis done by NPR, done by the New York Times, done by CNN. It was not ambiguous what happened. We watched people fire bullets with no legitimate provocation, into the bodies of innocent Americans. We should care about everybody. And I'm also calling on people who specifically care about Americans to care about Americans. We've all watched that happen. And then we've watched the government brazenly and shamelessly lie about it.
And Marcy, we're lawyered up on this panel because there's Bernard Harcourt who's a lawyer. We have Malcolm Bigot, who did legal studies. Bernard, let me ask you, because Alex Pretti had a license to carry a handgun, as Minnesota allows. You just heard Marcy describe the video evidence. It shows that this nurse was shot by two agents while trying to intercede on behalf of a protester who'd been pepper sprayed by the agents. But is that video evidence enough?
Well, look, the video evidence is what we have right now. And the video evidence is the basis on which law enforcement, prosecutors, attorney generals, et cetera, will decide whether or not to pursue an investigation, which of course they must, given the evidence. You said he had a license to carry. Now, the initial evidence from those videos is that the weapon that he was carrying lawfully had been removed from him and taken out of the melee before the officer and then the second officer began shooting 10 shots at him and killing him. So from the evidence we have so far, it's pretty clear that there didn't seem to be any risk to the officers or to bystanders. And therefore, it looks like a pretty simple case of, unreasonable use of law enforcement lethal force. So that's the question. Of course, there's no immunity. J.D. Vance had spoken about absolute immunity. He's fortunately retracted anything about that since there is no such thing. But there isn't immunity for a law enforcement officer. The only question is whether it's a reasonable use of lethal force. And that comes up all the time in police shootings, law enforcement use of lethal force. It's nothing new in any way. The only thing that is new is that the federal government has been trying to effectively shield the incident from any kind of investigation. And in that sense, it's a real departure from what we call the rule of law and from ordinary practice. That's not done.
So
That's
in the
not way
last
things
minutes,
are done.
Bernard, the White House spokesperson saying that both the FBI and Homeland Security have opened investigations into this latest shooting. Based on how it's gone in the nearly 3 weeks since Renée Good was killed, what would you say on that score?
Well, I mean, it's important that the federal agencies have started investigations. I also understand that President Trump told Governor Walz that the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension could conduct also an independent investigation into the shooting of Alex Pretti. So it seems as if investigations are going to be going forward both at a federal and at a state level. What troubles me is the unprofessional way in which these crime scenes have been treated and the unprofessional way in which the ICE agents have been operating. These are crime scenes. And they should be immediately turned into a crime scene where people aren't allowed to just walk around or lay wreaths or something. There's a lot of documentation that needs to be taken. That's always done. It's just ordinary. I mean, as James Cook will tell you, any criminal defense attorney knows, any prosecutor knows, you have a crime scene, you need to figure out where bullets were shot, where people were, where the blood is. All of that information needs to be, in a way, investigated. When you had the Renée Good shooting, the agent who actually shot and killed her just got in his car and left. I mean, that's not acceptable by any standard of law enforcement procedure. So what's troubling is that there's such an exceptionality going on right now that it's hard to believe that the federal investigator is going to be doing a professional job, given that the scene itself has not been secured, etc.
Malcolm Biga, what conclusions should we draw on this side of the Atlantic? We even heard the German Chancellor weigh in at a summit this Monday in Hamburg about, well, we hope there's going to be a proper investigation. Why does this matter so much to Europeans?
Because you see more and more French people around me are asking if America is still democracy. I will say America is not yet, it's still a democracy, but is more and more authoritarian state. And the issue we have is ICE. ICE was supposed to be, it still to be a federal agency. More and more ICE is a militia. Is a militia which doesn't work with federal local forces. In Minnesota, you have 600 local forces working under the Minnesota state and Minneapolis city. And Donald Trump deployed 3,000 federal agents, And those agents don't work with the local forces. And Amy Klobuchar, the Democratic senator, expressed this yesterday.
Senator from Minnesota.
From Minnesota. It's impossible for local forces to take back the power federal agents took from Minnesota. So it's a real issue for Tim Walz, the governor, and Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis.
So James Cook, two questions then concretely. Once a federal agency takes over an investigation, that's it, following up from what Malcolm just said? And secondly, what are the chances that any of the shooters in these two incidents will ever be brought to justice or convicted?
So just to answer, let's take each question in order. So I think the first question is just in terms of the investigation. We should work together. I mean, in most of these cases, I've been involved in a lot of cases where there's federal and state overlap, which is most of the police cases that my office does. And I just want to remind you, I worked for the gentleman who did the Rodney King versus City of Los Angeles case. So we have a lot of practice in doing cases that involve federal and state issues. So yeah, usually we work together. Usually the state and the federal government work together. In terms of the other question that you posed is whether or not these officers will be brought to justice. So both professors kind of alluded to this about immunity. There is the issue of qualified immunity. Most officers argue when you sue them that they have qualified immunity, saying that, you know, as long as they, basically in layman's terms, as long as they acted within the law or thought that they were, they should be immune from any type of liability. However, as the other professor, Marcy, said, you know, you can synthesize philosophy and law, and she studies Kant. I mean, this is one of those situations where you have an a priori perspective that, you know, the video should show you that officers did not follow protocol, that they escalated the situation. They escalated to the situation to a point where they decided to shoot someone, and then, you know, they didn't treat the crime scene properly. So whether or not these officers will be brought to justice, I think that's my job. That's our job as our law office, and we're sure going to try.
Brought to justice, do you think it will happen in a criminal court or in a civil court?
I think that it's going to take a civil court. We just completed a large lawsuit in the city of Antioch, California, where the officers were texting about how they frame people and how they beat people up, you know, so on and so forth. And some of those officers actually went to jail. We had another case where the officer, you know, he shot someone in the head as he's walking away. It was caught on video. He went to jail. I only hope that the same thing happens in this case, but, you know, we have to go through the litigation process.
Let me ask you about this, Marcy Shore, because you heard Malcolm Biga saying people here in Europe wondering about the state of democracy in the United States. While we've been talking, the White House spokesperson says that Donald Trump has demanded an end to, quote, resistance and chaos in Minneapolis. Your reaction?
So I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to sound as careful and moderate. You know, I think we are no longer democracy. I think we are well into authoritarianism. I think there is a tremendous amount of denial about that, perhaps especially among Europeans who continue to hold on to this idea that America is the arsenal of democracy, you know, and the land of the free and the home of the brave. Attorney Cook mentioned the Rodney King case. I don't know how many French viewers are familiar with that, but I'm old enough to have been, you know, I'm old enough to remember that. And I was at those demonstrations. 1992, yes. I was a second-year student at Stanford University, so I was in the Bay Area. I was in California. I was at those demonstrations against the police violence that was applied to Rodney King. You know, and that was a moment when things in our country should have turned, because it was an illumination of the extent to which Black Americans in particular were subjected to tremendous amounts of arbitrary violence. And you can say that the original sin, of my country is that we were built on slavery, never completely confronted that. We sent racially segregated troops to Europe to fight the Nazis. We had miscegenation laws in place until they were overturned in 1967. And we have had mass incarceration and arbitrary violence applied, especially to communities and peoples of color since then. And there has not been the kind of reckoning with that there needs to be. And now that kind of arbitrary violence that had been confined largely to certain groups, now that arbitrary violence has encompassed all of society. And the question is there now going to be a reckoning? And now is, of course, a difficult moment because we have descended so far into authoritarianism. And I just want to add that doesn't mean that there is nobody who can be trusted. There are heroic people out there in sub-freezing temperatures in Minneapolis. There are people in Washington who are out there every day, Jasmine Crockett, Chris Murphy, Jamie Raskin, AOC, who have absolute moral clarity. They're people I would trust personally, but they are not winning right now. And the people in power have absolutely no respect or consideration for democracy and the rule of law at all.
So Gregory Bavino, this is that field commander for ICE. He's been the face of heavy-handed tactics in other cities like Chicago. And he's been standing out, Marcy, wearing this, what is it, like a World War I style military coat for the cold weather. You saw it there a minute ago. Now and he's not wearing it in those images, but we saw it in that first picture. The coat, what does that represent for you? And is he above the law?
He certainly believes he's above the law. If anyone watched that gruesome interview with Dana Bash on CNN yesterday, where he absolutely refused, she was doing her job, but he absolutely refused to answer her questions. She said, Department of Homeland Security claims that Pretti was brandishing a weapon. Where here do you see brandishing a weapon? Again and again, and he just brazenly dissimulated and lied in front of everybody. I mean, he's cosplaying some kind of Gestapo-like role, in my opinion, or in my reading. These people feel that they are immune. These people feel that they can do whatever they want with impunity. My Ukrainian friends would call this, we have crime without punishment and punishment without crime. It's this rule of the arbitrary, that word I keep using in Russian, произвол, from the video, which is a word arbitrariness that's always already tinged with tyranny and the potential for terror that atomizes people because nobody knows who's going to be next. And it's something that I think Black Americans have experience of, and most other Americans don't. And we haven't even developed yet a language to articulate what's happening to us with these people who believe that they're above the law, who now have gone from casual disregard for other people's lives to performative sadism. I mean, you look at Kristi Noem's quasi-sexual video op-eds in front of the prison in El Salvador. These are people who are reveling in cruelty, and I think Bovino is one of them. I think he's reveling in cruelty.
Are they above the law, Bernard Harcourt?
All right. Well, I think they are trying to be above the law. Let me try and cover a few topics that we've addressed. With my lawyer hat on and then with my lawyer hat off, just quickly, because I think some listeners might be confused on the questions of qualified immunity or what James Cook was talking about. It's important just to distinguish between civil litigation and criminal litigation. And so we should keep in mind that those are two different tracks, two different possibilities. There can be criminal pursuits of the officers who shot. There can be civil litigation brought by the estate of the family of the victims, et cetera. And so that should, who brings those is different, of course. It's the families with their civil lawyers, or it's the state or the federal prosecutors. And that's important. In that context, in the civil context, there is qualified immunity. In the criminal context, which I was talking about earlier, there is really no immunity. It's just a question of whether or not the officers acted reasonably. All right, that's with my lawyer hat. Marcy was saying that the lawyers are being more restrained than she is, but I, with my lawyer hat on or off, I mean, I've been arguing for a long time now that we're in the middle of what I would call a a counter-revolution using tactics that go back to counterinsurgency warfare. And I think we see it here vividly, the way in which Alex Pretti or Ms. Good are being referred to as domestic terrorists, right? That's painting them as the internal enemy. And in the counterinsurgency warfare paradigm, that's what you do. You find internal enemies, you eliminate internal enemies. Here they're being shot by an active counterinsurgent force, and these are the ICE agents. And of course, for the rest of us, you give us a lot of bread and circus. You win our hearts and minds with a lot of distractions. And we've seen that as well, since there's so many, every day is a different news cycle, whether it's Greenland or Venezuela, etc. But the point is that, yes, I mean, we are in a situation where the Trump administration is trying to create a unit here, the ICE agents who are above the law, who are protected more than others, who are given immunity, even if there is no legal immunity. And so that is a form of authoritarianism. Now, in terms of, Marcy spoke about the Gestapo. So the comparisons to fascism are always tricky because there's so much history involved. If one were to compare what's going on right now, I don't think that Bovino would be compared to the Gestapo. I think it would be more compared to the brown shirts or early stormtroopers that were very faithful to the leader and that were immune in a certain and rogue. So I mean, I think those would be the comparisons that I would be making.
All right. Yeah. And although it's been debunked that ICE includes in its ranks the head of the Proud Boys militia that took part in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol in 2021, Democratic lawmakers in Congress earlier this month opened an inquiry to probe possible links between those pardoned by President Trump over the deadly rioting to stop the certification of that 2021 election and the more than 12,000 new hires at ICE this past year. Malcolm Biga, is it an exaggeration what Bernard Harcourt just said, that this is that ICE is acting like a 1920s, 30s style militia?
No, it's not different. And actually, I would like to go back to the example Marcy gave. She mentioned the Rodney King case. I wasn't born yet during the events, but I do remember the legal consequences of the Rodney King. It was the last time the U.S. federal government used the Insurrection Act. And I believe, it's my theory, but I believe...
And the Insurrection Act, just to remind our viewers, is when you can deploy federal troops. In that case, the governor of California asked for help.
Yes. They did ask for help in 1992, but I think President Trump, is trying to create the condition to use the Insurrection Act to deploy more and more federal and the military across the states. And why can we go from that? I think President Trump is trying to prevent Americans to dissent, to prevent Americans to express dissatisfaction against the president, and maybe in 6 months, 8 months, if you try to prevent Americans to vote, it would be disgraceful situation.
That's been talked about, but where's the proof?
We have no proof yet, but as you can see, Minnesota, it's a tipping point. If the president does not de-escalate the situation, it could be a theory, and maybe in practice we'll use the Insurrection Act.
James Cook, what's been your experience what's been your experience in the last year when it comes to how you've... Oh, we seem to have lost the connection there. The gremlins are in the system. Well, I'll put it to you, Bernard Harcourt. Are courts acting differently than they were? The fact that there have been some orders or rulings that have been ignored, are the courts acting differently 1 year on?
Well, I would say that the lower courts, the lower federal courts, I mean, so we have a three-tier system of federal courts. The lowest is the trial court, what's called the district court. Those courts have been, I would say, at the front line, trying to prevent many of the excesses that have been taking place. Am I on?
You're still on, yes. James Cook is back, I'm
Still on.
told. So go ahead. But go ahead, Darnell. Finish your point.
But I think what we've seen is that the Trump administration, which has really been working the federal system, has been trying to move the cases up to the United States Supreme Court through the use of emergency stays of lower court opinions, and that they've been very successful at doing that. Now, the Supreme Court is predominantly conservative at this point, predominantly a Trump court, with at least 6 members who faithfully toe the Trump administration's line. And so the world has changed in terms of the independence of the federal judiciary.
James,
there's no doubt about that.
Let me bring in James Cook on this. James, is there a feeling of the way the panelists have described some kind of creeping authoritarianism in your personal experience of the past year? Or is this just all the standard stuff, the standard battles that you find in a U.S. court of law, well, since the beginning, really?
The last thing I heard was Mr. Blige saying that Trump is trying to create the conditions for insurrection. It feels like it on the ground. I mean, I'm here. I was in court. 3 sort of community leaders got arrested last week because they participated in a church protest. They went to the church. They sort of interrupted the pastor, and not much happened after that. They left the church. They were arrested. Kristi Noem tweeted before they issued the arrest. We really didn't think it was going to happen. They rounded them up, put them in jail, and then the government they made arguments. And they did some things that you don't normally see. So, the arguments that they made to maintain the people in detention were spurious at best. But I mean, it seemed like they really thought that these things were going to win. So, ultimately the people were let out of custody. But these are people that really clearly didn't do a whole lot. Right. Also, protesters are being arrested for protesting, with not the people that are throwing stuff at the officers or anything like that. These are people that are just shouting and sometimes just watching. So I think when you look at all these things on the ground, people getting tear gas just for observing the protests, I think we're creating conditions for Trump to sort of invoke the Insurrection Act.
Do you feel sitting in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
Do you feel as though this is getting people more worked up, or are they cowed by this heavy-handed reaction?
Yeah, let me answer that this way, okay? I grew up here. I'm from Minneapolis. In the '80s, I was a punk rock kid, skateboard, question authority. That's where I come from, Gen X. I think that we passed down that ethos. The similar ethos, that we had back in the '80s, divest from South Africa, that type of thing. I think that we pass it on, and I think that every time they do something, you can see that people are going to make their resistance known. The millennials, the Gen X people, and they have social media to be more effective and faster. So I don't think that they're going to be cowed. I think that every time every time that the administration tries to do something, they are going to resist and push back. You're seeing it. It's very organized, right? Where near where I live, where Powwow Grounds is, that is the heartbeat of the resistance. Very organized. Clothes, food, discuss tactics for what to do when ICE rolls through your neighborhood in a column. The resistance is real.
All right, and let's take a listen to the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. He was Kamala Harris's vice presidential running mate in the last election. He hails from the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. Sunday, he asked aloud, what would Trump need to get these federal agents out of our state?
You thought fear, violence, and chaos is what you wanted from us, and you clearly underestimated the people of this state and nation. We are tired, but we're resolved. We're peaceful, but we'll never forget. We're angry, but we won't give up hope. And above all else, we are clearly unified.
Marcy Shore, this was for people on the outside looking in, seems like a measured response. Would you have liked to heard a more fiery one from the governor of Minnesota?
I think he's been very good. You know, I've never been a political leader, but I think one of the things he constantly has in his mind is that what the Trump administration is trying to do is provoke the kind of violence that will then justify a more violent crackdown. And there's a whole kind of theory about this in the field of history I study, which is Eastern Europe, the word provocatio, provocation. In English, it doesn't quite have the same oomph, but so much of what the Trump administration is doing is trying to provoke the violence that will then justify things like the Insurrection Act, that will then justify an attempt to turn the American military, against American citizens. So I can see that Tim Walz is walking a very fine line. I think he's been very resolute. I've generally been extremely admiring of him.
Malcolm Biga, your thoughts on some people are saying, in France, some people saying, where's the opposition in the United States? Something like this happens here, you'd have millions in the streets,
it's true. Claim. And there is no opposition, and when you compare to the...
There's no opposition, you're saying?
There is no opposition yet, but I mean, as much as the George Floyd protest, it was the same city, it was the same state, the same governor and the same mayor. It was 6 years ago, and if you remember, George Floyd was murdered on May 25, and a week after, we had protests around the world.
Including in Paris? Including
in Paris, in France, in Japan. It was a week after the murder of George Floyd. But here, in this case, we had Renée Good, we had Alex Pretti. It's been one weekend since Alex Pretti, but 2 people from Minnesota killed on video. And I think it's getting harder and harder to dissent in the US because maybe people are afraid.
Is it, Bernard Cour, is there more dissent to come or less?
Well, I think there's more to come. I think that we saw an amazing turnout for the protests in Minnesota on Friday. They basically closed down the city. It was a general strike that they put into effect. And I think that the opposition is slowly mounting. I agree that it's that one might have expected more, but on this last homicide, Alex Pretti, I mean, people who you wouldn't expect in the Democratic leadership are actually coming out. And Governor Hochul, for instance, governor of New York State, made a very impressive statement calling on Kristi Noem to resign and saying that people would be brought to justice. It was a very powerful statement, unexpected in a way. Wouldn't expect this from Governor Hochul. And of course, Obama issued kind of a statement that it was kind of an Obama statement. So, but that does reflect the fact that there is more and more resistance coming, I think. I would expect that this is reviving in a way the Black Lives Matter movement, which was an incredibly strong, robust movement during the summer of 2020. It brought out more people than had ever come out in protest in the United States. And I would expect that what's going on right now with the ICE protests is going to reach the level of Black Lives Matter.
So, James Cook, again, since you're from Minneapolis, Renée Good, Alex Pretti, both killed in the same city where there was that murder of George Floyd in 2020 by police officer Derek Chauvin. Now, Derek Chauvin was eventually convicted, and that, in a way, helped to give some people a sense that there was justice to a degree. Your thoughts on what happened then versus what's happening now?
We got to remember a couple things. Like, if you're looking at the resistance, like, or sort of the amount of protests, and that thing is a measure of whether or not of the feeling. There's logistical things to consider. Number one, it was summer. It was the spring of 2020 when George Floyd happened, and just it was spring, right? And then right now we're talking about the middle of the winter, January, which is usually the coldest month in Minnesota. It's literally 20 degrees below zero. So if the temperature is near zero, that means the wind chill is going to be in the 40s. So the fact that so many people are out is impressive. I think then another thing that happened is that the police station got burned down in our neighborhood. So that actually drew a lot more media to what happened, and then it kind of spread from there. I would say this though, while it doesn't, if you're on the outside looking in, you're not in Minneapolis right now watching, things on the ground. There is a lot more support from people from other states. People are coming in to bring just to volunteer, bring supplies, lend to the protests, and then people are setting up, ways to communicate electronically. I don't want to say exactly how but so you got a lot of that, and you got a lot of people working together. Plus, you got to remember, it's not just a protest for some people. In the midst of all this, there are people being deported. That's where this all started from. People are being ripped from their homes, taken to the Whipple building where we are right now, and they're held and they're detained for a period of time, and they don't know how long. And then they're shipped off to Texas, to Fort Bliss, which is basically a concentration camp. In fact, I think it was a concentration camp for Japanese people during World War II. So there's that. So you take a lot of people off the street that are just their very life and safety is at stake. You get parents ripped from their children. Like, who's going to take from their children? It'd be irresponsible for those people to go out on the street and protest if there's a chance of that. And yeah, people are scared, and they started taking U.S. citizens. So the stakes are a lot higher. And I think that, Trump tried to do this in L.A. and a couple other states, and it wasn't really successful. I think that Minneapolis, like he said, gives them a training ground. We've got to practice out on the streets of the major blue cities. And, and I think they're honing their tactics and techniques.
Marcy Shore, one final question, and it kind of follows up from what James Cook just said about the sort of the political agenda in all of this. You mentioned earlier kind of a performative cruelty. Why?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I ask myself that every day, but we've seen it before historically. There's the narcotic of power. There's Trump's perverse relationship with Putin. There's the narcissism and desire to crush everybody else and create a cult of oneself. And my plea to Europeans would be, do not normalize this. Do not think that this is an administration that, maybe is a little bit more radical than it should be, but can somehow be finessed or flattered or dealt with. You have to kind of look at it in the eye, and see what's happening and kind of shake yourself into seeing that this is not okay. This is not normal. And that you're looking into this abyss of moral nihilism. These are people who have no principles, no values, for whom other people's lives is literally meaningless. I mean, you watch them lie brazenly, shamelessly, openly to the American people about murders we have just watched.
We'll have to leave it there for now. I want to thank you, Marcy Shore, for being with us from Toronto. I want to thank as well Malcolm Biga, Bernard Harcourt in New York City, and James Cook for being with us from Minneapolis. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24
Thank
debate.
you for having me.